Welcome back to another video. As you can tell by the title, today I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can use your sourdough discard. Now, a couple of months ago, I started my own sourdough starter, which has been an adventure in itself. And since then, I've been trying to find different ways to use up my sourdough discard so I don't actually have to waste it and throw it out. So I figured I would compile a couple of the recipes that have really worked for me into a video to help you in case you also have some sourdough discard that you need to get rid of. That being said, if you have some sourdough discard recipes that you love and that really work for you, please let me know in the comments as well so I can give them a try. Now, without further ado, let's get into our first recipe, which is going to be sourdough discard waffles. Now for the waffles, you're going to need 80 grams of softened butter, 60 grams of sugar with a pinch of salt, 1 splash of vanilla extract, 3 room temperature eggs, 250 grams of flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 200 milliliters of milk, and 100 grams of your sourdough discard. Now to make the waffles, we're going to start by creaming together the butter, sugar, salt, and vanilla until creamy, before adding in our eggs one at a time. Now we can simply add the remainder of our ingredients and whisk that together until smooth. Now your goal is to get like a thick batter consistency like this, because you don't want your waffle batter to be too thin because it's just going to run right out of your waffle iron. So just add flour or milk accordingly until you have a nice consistency like this. Now the only plug-in in my kitchen that works with my waffle iron is right by the stove behind me. So I've already just got that preheating. Now essentially all you're going to do is make waffles however you make your waffles. And I prefer to let them cool off just on a wire rack. And I just add like a little bit of kitchen paper underneath to kind of catch some of that moisture so that they stay crispy, because I like my waffles crispy. And there's our waffles. Now I managed to get out 5 waffles, but depending on the size of your waffle iron, you might get out 1 or 2 more or 1 or 2 less. Now I'm definitely not going to finish all of these waffles today, so I usually end up freezing them, and then once I'm ready to eat them, I'll either air fry them for a couple minutes or just pop them into the toaster. Now for the second recipe, we're going to be making sourdough discard pizza. Now I basically just adjusted the pizza recipe that I already have on my channel, which you can see in this video. And the big difference is basically just the amount of water, flour, and yeast. Now, I also want to note that I'm using a 70% hydration in this video, whereas my regular recipe has a 55% hydration level. That being said, for this recipe, you're going to need 250 milliliters of water, 200 grams of your discard, 350 grams of flour. I'm using whole wheat, but just use whatever flour you want, a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 3 tablespoons of olive oil or any oil that you want, 1 teaspoon of oregano, and I'm also adding in some fresh cracked pepper. Now you can totally adjust the amount of yeast that you use. I'm using a 1/4 teaspoon just to kind of help my pizza dough double in size a little bit faster. If your sourdough discard is super strong, you might not even have to add any yeast at all. You're just gonna have to wait a couple more hours for your dough to double in size. Now, all that aside, let's actually get to making our pizza dough. Now, I'm just going to start by letting my yeast bloom with a little bit of my sugar and water. I'm just gonna set that aside for 10 minutes. Now, in the meantime, we can pretty much just add the rest of our ingredients into our big mixing bowl. Now the last thing we're going to add into our bowl is our yeast, and then we're just going to knead this together for around 7 minutes or until you have a nice smooth dough. Now I'm going to be making 2 large pizzas, so I divided my dough into 2 already. In my case, each of my halves are 431 grams, but that's obviously going to change depending on the flour that you use and all those variables. Now all we're going to do is, with the help of some flour, we're going to roughly shape this into a ball, and then we're going to put them into a bowl with a little bit of olive oil and cover it with plastic wrap or a kitchen towel to proof. Now we're gonna let these proof for 2 to 4 hours, but again, depending on the amount of yeast that you use, this might go quicker or it might go slower. You basically just wanna wait until they're just doubled in size. So it's been about 5 hours and our dough has definitely doubled in size, if not even more. Now I let my dough proof on the counter for 3 hours before transferring it to the fridge. That being said, our dough is now also cold, which is going to help us shape it a little bit easier. Now before we start shaping, I'm going to start preheating my oven to 230 degrees Celsius or 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm just going to shape these pizzas like I normally would shape my pizzas. If you want to see how I do that, you can watch it in my other video. And then I'm just going to put them onto these pizza trays and set them aside. Now I'm going to pre-bake my pizza crust for 4 to 5 minutes, and that's just going to help make sure that we get a super nice crispy crust. Now all that's left to do is add your toppings and then push it back into the oven for another 5 to 8 minutes, or until the cheese is nice and gooey and brown. Now for the third recipe, we're going to be making sourdough discard crackers. Now these are super customizable because you can add just about any seeds that you want. But in this case, we're going to be using 100 grams of whole wheat flour, 200 grams of your discard, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, a good pinch of salt, 1 to 2 tablespoons of honey. Now you can adjust that depending on how sour your discard is. If it's super sour, you might want to add a little bit more honey. In my case, I have 2 tablespoons. And then you can add any seeds that you want. I have 2 tablespoons each of sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, flax seeds, and chia seeds. Now we basically just want to mix this together once until we have a nice dough that's all combined. Now depending on the hydration of your sourdough discard, you might want to add a little bit more flour just to make sure that it's not too sticky. Now we basically just want to roll this out until it's super thin. Now, if you have small baking trays, I'd suggest dividing this dough into 2 and rolling it out onto 2 trays. But I have 1 really big tray and I have 1 really big baking mat, so I'm just going to use that. Now, it's also helpful to use a second piece of parchment paper to make it a little bit less sticky when you're rolling it out. Now that it's rolled out super thin like this, you can either cut out little shapes using cookie cutters, or you can just use a pizza knife and cut a bunch of lines to make some nice cracker squares. Now to make sure that these don't puff up when they're baking, we can stab them a couple of times with a fork. Now if you'd like, you can brush the top of the crackers with some more olive oil and sprinkle on some salt. Now I also sprinkled them with some additional seeds, but that's totally optional. Now these can go into the oven that's been preheated to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit for around 25 to 30 minutes. You basically just want these to be nice and golden brown. Now you just want to let your crackers cool before you start breaking them apart. And there you have it, super easy and quick crackers. So that's going to be everything for today's video. If you enjoyed it, you can give it a thumbs up or write me a comment down below. And as always, all of the recipes are going to be in the description box as well. And if you have any ways that you use your sourdough discard, do let me know in the comments as well.